Becky was born into poverty, and when she was 8 years old, her parents both died of illness, after which she was sent to a convent by her relatives. 10 years later, now grown up, Becky found herself a job as a governess and decided to leave the convent. Before leaving, her close friend Amelia warmly invited Becky to stay at her home for a while. On the carriage ride, Becky inquired about Amelia's family, and when she learned that Amelia had an unmarried brother named Joseph, Amelia's eyes suddenly lit up. Amelia's family warmly welcomed Becky, even though Joseph was extremely unattractive. His distinguished family background and wealthy lifestyle made Becky, who had long struggled with poverty, feel deeply drawn to it. Becky used everything she had learned to cater to their preferences, fully displaying her talents. Seeing how talented and versatile Becky was, Joseph soon became attracted to her. The next day, Amelia took Becky to meet her fiancé George. However, the snobbish George showed no interest in the poor Becky, and he also treated his fiancée Amelia with cold indifference. Becky tried her best to please Joseph, saying many insincere compliments to him, and this admiration made Joseph feel elated. But behind the scenes, George warned Joseph about her intentions. After that,
"Do you think the fellas down at the club would let their wives dine with a governess? Seriously, Jos, if I'm to marry your sister..."
Joseph began to distance himself from Becky. The following day, Becky tactfully left Amelia's home and boarded a carriage alone, heading to her employer's house in the countryside. In order to save money on travel expenses, Becky got off the carriage when she reached a small town. Dragging her heavy luggage, she walked 10 kilometers on foot and finally arrived at her employer's estate. Although her employer was a lord, his home appeared messy and disorganized, and he was not an easy person to get along with. But after hearing that his property would soon be inherited by his young nephew Rawdon, Becky placed her hopes on the man she had never met. She diligently tutored the two young girls and used her hard-working nature to completely transform the Lord's household. The Lord greatly appreciated Becky's capability. Before long, Rawdon returned to the estate after retiring from the front lines, and accompanying him was their wealthy aunt from London, Miss Crawley. As Rawdon spoke about his aunt's preferences, Becky realized that Miss Crawley held a crucial position within the family. If she wanted to win over Rawdon, she first needed to gain Miss Crawley's favor. Becky introduced herself with confidence and composure. When Miss Crawley learned that Becky was proficient in piano, fluent in French, and highly knowledgeable about painting, she took the initiative to invite Becky to dinner. During the meal, Becky carefully observed every word and action of Miss Crawley. She always went along with Miss Crawley's preferences, subtly guiding the entire atmosphere of the dinner. Becky's bright and lively demeanor made Miss Crawley feel younger as well. Sure enough, when Miss Crawley returned to London, she strongly invited Becky to accompany her. Along the way, looking at the youthful and charming Becky, Rawdon felt increasingly restless. He reached out to test her reaction and whispered suggestive words into her ear, but Becky maintained a proud and composed expression throughout. A day later, they finally arrived in London. The bustling city dazzled Becky, and she secretly made up her mind to carve out a place for herself here. In the days that followed, Becky often accompanied Miss Crawley when she went out to meet influential and high-status people. Unexpectedly, at one gathering, she encountered George again. When Becky volunteered to perform a piece for everyone, George approached her with ill intent and whispered sarcastic remarks.
"How do you like your new place?"
My place? How kind of you to remind me. It's quite tolerable, thank you. And they treat me very well. But then this is a gentleman's family, and quite a change from tradespeople.
You seemed to like tradespeople well enough last year.
I know what you're thinking. What an honor to have had you for a brother-in-law.
Rawdon, standing nearby, noticed George's rudeness. That night, he won 200 francs from George. After seeing George and his family off, Rawdon told Becky that he had avenged her and hoped to take her on a date as a form of gratitude. What Rawdon did not realize was that this was exactly what Becky had been hoping for. Faced with Rawdon's advances, Becky skillfully played hard to get and knew exactly how to keep a man intrigued. At just the right moment, she would turn away and leave. A few days later, the Lord hurried over from the countryside. It turned out that his wife had passed away from illness, and without a woman in the house, everything had fallen into complete disorder. He hoped Becky could return to help manage the estate. As he spoke, the Lord suddenly knelt down and said that he wanted to marry Becky. Becky was completely caught off guard by this sudden situation. For a moment, she could not find a suitable reason to refuse this old man who was older than her own father, so she lied and claimed that she was already engaged to someone else. At that moment, Miss Crawley, who had been listening behind the door, curiously asked Becky who this supposed fiancé was. When they learned that it was Rawdon, Miss Crawley nearly fainted on the spot. Although Miss Crawley truly liked Becky, when it came to family interests, she decisively drove her out of the house. The servants threw Becky's luggage onto the ground and mocked her shattered dream of marrying into wealth. Becky showed no sign of sadness at all, because she had already firmly captured Rawdon's heart. Fortunately, Rawdon did not abandon her. He rented an apartment for Becky, and they spent their days together. When Miss Crawley learned of this, she was so furious that she immediately rewrote her will, leaving all her property to Rawdon's elder brother. Meanwhile, Amelia's father faced bankruptcy after a failed business investment. He had no choice but to auction off the valuable items in their home to repay the massive debts. But the piano was Amelia's greatest treasure. She was deeply worried about losing it. Yet in the end, it was still sold. The next day, at Amelia's new, shabby house in the suburbs, a captain named William came to visit. Soon after, the piano that had been auctioned was delivered by workers to Amelia's doorstep. Seeing the piano, Amelia rushed forward in excitement. She believed that George must have bought it back for her. Watching her happiness, William, who had actually sent the piano, chose not to reveal the truth. What Amelia did not know was that George's always opportunistic father, after seeing Amelia's family fall into decline, had been busy searching for a wealthy bride for George elsewhere. But when George saw how unattractive the girl his father had chosen was, he got into a fierce argument with him. However, his father, driven by wealth, forced George to marry that girl. In anger, George returned to Amelia's side once again, but at that very moment, due to the urgent situation on the front lines, William, George, and Rawdon were about to be recalled by the army. So Becky and Amelia decided to follow them and move to Brussels, which was closer to the front. Before leaving, Rawdon left all his belongings to Becky, and at that time, Becky was already pregnant with his child. With the arrival of war, Brussels fell into chaos. Becky spent all her savings to buy a ticket back to London, but during the escape, Amelia was desperately searching everywhere for news of George. Deeply worried about her husband's safety and determined to stay in Brussels to wait for his return. Seeing Amelia's firm decision, Becky could not bear to leave her alone in such turmoil, so she chose to stay with her. Unfortunately, George died on the battlefield, while William and Rawdon both returned safely. Amelia, heavily pregnant, buried George. A few months later, William came to visit Amelia and hoped she would go with him to India to start a new life. It turned out that William had always loved Amelia in silence. Now that George was gone, he was willing to take care of George's child together with her. But thinking that George had only just passed, Amelia firmly refused him. Meanwhile, Rawdon and Becky were enjoying a simple and peaceful happiness. From the moment their son began to toddle, 7 years passed in the blink of an eye. Although George's father did not accept Amelia as his daughter-in-law, he did accept his grandson. Amelia returned to live with her parents, spending each day in the painful longing for her child. On the other side, Rawdon gradually became addicted to gambling. After losing all his compensation money, he fell into debt everywhere, and creditors came knocking at his door every day. Becky had no choice but to take her son and move to a remote countryside. She could only survive by doing hard labor every day, and her son grew increasingly dissatisfied. Just as they were on the verge of collapse, Rawdon's uncle, the Lord, fell seriously ill, and Rawdon inherited all of his property. They naturally moved into the Lord's estate. Although Aunt Crawley still looked down on Becky, seeing that their son had grown up, she had no choice but to accept her. However, Rawdon did not know how to cherish the wealth that came so easily. Within just 1 year, he lost all of the inheritance left by his uncle, and everything valuable in the house was taken away by creditors. Just when Becky had no way out, a powerful-looking baron offered to help her. It turned out that the baron had once bought a painting by Becky's father and admired his talent, which was why he sought her out. He then gave Becky a large sum of francs, helping her overcome her financial crisis. But the baron had his own intentions. In the days that followed, he took Becky to attend various social events. Becky's charming singing voice and beautiful appearance made the baron look very impressive in front of others. The baron bluntly told Becky that he wanted her to become his mistress, but Becky refused him on the grounds that she already had a husband. Yet in order to rely on the baron's support, Becky continued to maintain an ambiguous relationship with him. Before long, rumors spread across half of London. Wherever Becky appeared, noble ladies would avoid her with disdain and refuse to interact with her. But Becky did not retreat because of this. With the baron's introduction, she even gained the opportunity to perform a dance for the king as the main attraction.
It's the money of
after her performance, even the king was captivated by Becky's vibrant energy. Becky thoroughly enjoyed this kind of success. Meanwhile, Rawdon was imprisoned for failing to repay his debts. In prison, Rawdon asked a lawyer to write letters for help to both his elder brother and Becky, but in the end, the only person who came was his sister-in-law. She brought the ransom and took him home. What Rawdon did not know was that all of this was part of the Baron's scheme. In order to get Becky, the Baron used her son to threaten her and prevented her from rescuing Rawdon. When Rawdon returned home, he witnessed an unbearable scene between the Baron and his wife. Rawdon was instantly furious. He drove the Baron out and tore off all the jewelry the Baron had given Becky. Facing the large check given to Becky by the Baron, Rawdon said that he had once given her everything, yet she was unwilling to spend even 100 to save him. He tore up the check and walked away. Becky explained that she had always lived in poverty and was afraid of returning to that life again, but Rawdon refused to listen to her explanation and left her decisively. He went to say goodbye to his brother and sister-in-law, then set off for a distant island in Somalia, deciding to stay there long-term. 12 years passed in the blink of an eye. Becky distanced herself from the Baron and worked as a card dealer in a casino, raising her son alone, until one day, a young boy named George came to the casino for the first time. When William came in looking for George, Becky realized that the boy in front of her was Amelia's son. George also recognized Becky and told her that his mother had inherited his grandfather's estate and hoped Becky would go see Amelia. But William knew that Becky's reputation was too poor, and he did not want the innocent Amelia to have any contact with her. Yet Amelia still chose to meet her old friend, because back in Brussels, Becky had chosen to stay with her during the chaos of war. Amelia believed in Becky's sincerity. When Amelia also learned how much William had quietly done for her all these years, she finally let go of the past and accepted him. And when Becky learned that Rawdon had died years earlier on a small island in Somalia after contracting malaria and failing to recover, as she lived in endless loneliness, Amelia's brother, the unattractive Joseph, once again appeared by her side.